there's a very strong aspect of the indigenous perspective that resides within Zen. And Zen, I believe, has that perspective because of its Taoist underpinnings.
Hello, and welcome to the Metta Hour podcast with Sharon Salzberg. I'm Lily Cushman. I produce this podcast, and we're coming to you today with our first episode of the new year of 2025, episode 256. And this is a conversation with first-time guest Norma Wong. Norma's a thought partner, a strategist, a Zen teacher, an author. And she's someone that, for those of you who have spent time with Sharon at the Ram Dass retreats on Maui, this is a great interview for you. Norma is a lifelong resident of Hawaii. She's descendant of Native Hawaiians and Hakka Chinese immigrants. And she has spent decades organizing policy, strategy, politics in Hawaii, particularly in areas of Native Hawaiian issues. She served as a Hawaiʻi State Legislature, among other things. She's also an 86th generation Zen Master, training for over 40 years with Chozen-ji, and she has recently put out a book. It's called When No Things Work. It's a talking story, weaving poetry, offering wisdom at the intersection of spiritual activism, strategy, and politics. She's someone who has learned how to take the very long, multi-generational view in activism and in her spiritual path. And so she shares a lot about how we can face the polarization and the discord that is just so pervasive these days by seeing the whole in a multi-generational view. So there's a lot of great inspiration here on that front. She and Sharon also talk about Norma's approach to faith and how to be involved in collective versus individual work. And you'll be happy to know that Sharon does mention the humidity on Maui, so very important. They also talk quite a bit about Norma's new book and different methods for opening to joy and goodness, as well as methods to interrupt long ingrained habits. The episode closes with Norma leading a resonant breathing practice, which is a big part of her Zen lineage and training. Okay, so before we get to the conversation, a few announcements. Sharon's annual Real Happiness Meditation Challenge is right around the corner. It starts February 1st, and this is a month-long challenge that has been happening for 15 years now. If you'd like to join us, it's really aimed at empowering students to build a home practice or to reconnect with a home practice. So if you're new to meditation or you need a reset with your practice, this is for you. And we offer it on a sliding scale donation basis. So you get 28 meditations, 28 lessons. It's a very robust offering. So if you'd like to join us, you're going to be part of a global community who does this challenge every year with us. And you can head over to Sharon's website, sharonsalzberg.com, to learn all about it, and hopefully you'll join us. Aside from the challenge, Sharon is also doing a mix of different teaching events in the coming month. Across January and February, you can practice with her online through IMS or the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, the Rubin Museum, Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, and others. So if you'd like to dial in for any of those, You can learn more at sharonsalzberg.com/events. Okay, so let's get into today's conversation. Sharon Salzberg and Norma Wong. Hello, Norma, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, aloha. Thank you for having me.
So how are you and where are you recording from today?
I am pretty well because the trade winds have returned. I'm here in Kalihi Valley on the island of Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands.
It's wonderful to meet you and to have you here today in conversation. I thought we could start with your introducing yourself, since it is a part of your tradition to introduce yourself formally.
Aloha. My name is Norma Ryuko Kawelokū Wong. I live in the Hawaiian Islands, and this has been my home for my entirety of my life. I'm of mixed ancestry. My ancestors came from that place that's now called China. They're the Hakka people who were the Aboriginal, one of the Aboriginal nomadic people, particularly of southern China. And also the Kanaka Maoli, the native people of the Hawaiian Islands. And so I am a biracial person living here, and I am an old person. I am 68 years old. For, your podcasters, that would mean that my features are both Polynesian and Asian. I have short hair that is now mostly gray and white, and short of stature, 5'4" and shrinking. And I am one of the people of this earth that are fortunate to be living in a very challenging time.
Well, thank you so much for that. I'm actually older than you are, so it was refreshing. So, I spent a little bit of time over the years on the island of Maui, where my friend and colleague Ramdas spent the last chapter of his life. And part of why I very much wanted to have you on this podcast is that many of the people who listen to this podcast have been attending those retreats on Maui over the years. So it feels like a special opportunity to speak with you today and to bring the rich energy and the wisdom of the islands to us. So you have a long history as a political activist, working for 30 years in different forms as a Hawaiʻi State Legislature and on the policy and strategy team for Governor John Waihe. Is that how you pronounce that?
Well, his name is actually pronounced Waihe.
Waihe, see?
Yes, there you go.
Governor John Waihe, or maybe you need to do it so it sounds correct.
John Waihe.
Thank you. You've worked on numerous campaigns, and there's another one coming up, including the munitions cleanup of, and what's the name of that island?
It's Kaho'olawe.
Thank you. Ceded land revenue for Native Hawaiians and the return of lands and settlement of land issues for Hawaiian homelands. And I'd like to hear what drew you to that work originally.
Well, the early part of my life was very much in community work, and particularly with respect to Native Hawaiian issues. I was very politically active. I went to my first party convention when I turned the age of 18. And, my worldview very much around the notion of how to improve the lives of people who live in these islands, with a particular focus on the native people of this place. So very early in my life, I began that work, and I still am called off the bench from time to time, even though I am no longer politically active.
I've spoken with many activists through the years,
often asking the question, what fuels the long-term journey? And I'm curious if you would be able to point to something that helped you sustain that kind of real caring for others and the effort to make life better for them.
Well, if you look at stewardship and governance as a something that is part of your generational role, and that your generational role is that one that you would pass on to the next generation, and one that you received from the previous generation, and that in the course of your life, if you choose to do so, then one of the things that you would have within the ways in which you would think about your work is you are one of many in a very long line in work that is going to take many, many generations to continue to pursue the ways in which the place and the peoples would be able to be in better relationship with each other. So if it's with that view, then you're not lurching from one issue to the next and one short-term loss or one short-term success, from one to the other. It's really about your life's work and the life's work that you would pass on to the next generation.
So much of your work seems to involve the ability to get through discord and polarization in order to meet a collective change point, which is something many people are trying to figure out right now. Do you have any advice for those undertaking that practice in their own communities or family systems?
Well, I would say that it is important to step back and to start from a premise of the whole, which is to say that we are frequently in discord because we have a different stance with respect to one issue or another. And we get into a tight fight with other people around the specifics of those issues. The question becomes, do we see a bigger picture? Have we created a bigger picture? Do we see our success as being in relationship to other people's success, or do we see it as being a win-lose situation? The more that you see something as a win-lose situation, then the more difficult it is to extract yourself from polarization.
Do you think that some of that perspective came to you from your life as a Zen practitioner?
Certainly, I would say it has, but it's also about the ways in which he would bring the indigenous worldview into that, which is in the indigenous worldview, the power that you have is in association with your relationship to the land, all of the beings that exist on the land, whether they're human or not, to ancestors, to descendants who have not yet been born, that you're in relationship, you see the whole as being the place of where things are healthy, and that when you are in a state of brokenness, it is because you are seeing yourself in polar opposites with the success of other humans or other beings. So this is there's a very strong aspect of the indigenous perspective that resides within Zen. And Zen, I believe, has that perspective because of its Taoist underpinnings.
So I know you're a student. I'm afraid you're going to have to pronounce your teacher's name for me as well.
And so it's Tanoi Tenshin Rotaishi.
Okay. And when did you first encounter those teachings?
I was very fortunate to meet my teacher in my early 20s. So just as I was elected to the state legislature, in fact, and it is one of the most fortunate aspects of my early life that I would begin my political path and my spiritual path at the same moment, almost at the same moment. And each grounded me, which is to say that I believe that if I had somehow taken on my spiritual life in absence of my political life, that I might have placed that in a hierarchy as somehow being more important, and vice versa. But instead, my spiritual life has had the fortune of being grounded in the work that needs to occur every day. And my political outlook has been grounded in the notion of interrupting your ego around things, and to be able to be as objective about your perspective while still holding a higher purpose.
And I understand it's a very breath-based lineage. Is that correct?
Yes. So, the meditation practice is foundational, and the meditation practice is very much about bringing your breath down low and slow with an emphasis on the exhalation. And if you are to master anything, it is to be able to have access to that breath, even as you're walking down the street, or if you're in conversation with a friend, or if you're entering a tricky situation and a crisis about to break open right in front of you, or driving a car. That notion of your body being able to be with you and not separate from me.
I want to talk also about your book, When No Things Work, Zen and Indigenous Perspective on Resilience, Shared Purpose, and Leadership in the Time Place of Collapse. It came out in the fall of 2024. First, it is such a great title. It reminds me in a way of when Pema Chodron was publishing her first book, and she wanted to call it When Things Fall Apart. And I was friendly with some of the people working in her publishing house, and they were all so upset, and they said, you can't call a book something like that. It has to be like happy, 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 and happier and happiest. And of course, she prevailed. She went ahead and did it. It was this huge, influential book because people could resonate with that title. Sometimes no things work, sometimes things fall apart.
Well, I will confess here, Sharon, even though, as a Buddhist, confession doesn't mean much. But I will confess here that it was actually my editor and the publisher who landed on this particular title.
Oh, that's great. And how did you feel about it?
Yes. Well, it's grown on me. Grown on me. What's grown on me is that it is plain with respect to what it is. And therefore, anyone who just picks up the book will neither be enticed nor thwarted from what it contains. Right? It's you're either attracted to the title or not.
That's great. And did you have like a singular inspiration for writing the book, or was it sort of more complex?
Well, I was talked into writing this book for my friend Taj James, who is a movement activist and leader. And he he lobbied me for almost 2 years, Sharon, to write this book. I come from a long line of people for whom writing is something we might do reluctantly because the traditions are more oral. You learn from people by being in conversation with them. And when you get to the point where you have a responsibility for teaching, that you put yourself in front of people and you have conversations with them. And so the notion of writing is something that we do reluctantly. But Sharon Taja's argument to me, which eventually prevailed, is he asked the question, in this time in which everything is accelerating and accelerating in a way in which collapse is occurring, can you, Norma, put yourself in front of enough people for there to be an evolution of humanity that would be able to stem the tide of collapse? And so he was questioning the technology of wisdom transfer and in a useful way. And so that was the impetus for the book.
Well, my experience has been, even though a book can seem so impersonal, sometimes there's something very personal about it. Like a million years ago, I went to a conference and made a friend there. We had some common interests in places like Burma. And then we totally lost touch. And then my first book came out, and she wrote me eventually, and she said, I was in a bookstore and your book fell on my head. and so we got back in touch, and we're friends to this day, So, and that book came out in 1995. So, my colleague, my friend Joseph Goldstein, had a book written and published, and somebody came up to us at a retreat and said, I was working on a cruise ship and I found your book in the trash. And I picked it up, and it meant the world to me. So I began to believe sort of not just in the impersonality of the transmission, but in the kind of rightfulness of people finding it somehow and perhaps having an impact.
Well, I would prefer that they find it in a book than in an Instagram. So, yes.
Yeah. A lot of your book is about what we can do in facing impossibly difficult circumstances. And here's a quotation from it. How do we aspire and live into the emergent worldview? The nothing less, so time-place, that feels enticingly beyond our reach. Eyes on the horizon, heart's core tethered to Mother Earth as she connects to the entirety of the universe. Breathe low and slow. Consciousness permeable to the full spectrum of space-time. Flexible and purposefully ready. Just leap. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you do speak a lot in the book about telling the story of future generations, which is such a beautiful practice that you call the far horizon story, or the embodiment of everything we hope our descendants will live into. This brings me to the importance of hope and faith when we're facing challenging or impossible things in life. And here's one of the things you say about faith, one of my favorite topics. Faith is what we have when we believe in ourselves and what it is we are about. The tangibility of our horizon story, not the probability. We have faith in our fellow travelers, fellow warriors, fellow poets, fellow farmers, fellow cooks on the path we are building together because we are building together. Can you share about the 3 steps of faith you lay out in the book, which are leap, aim, and act?
Sure. So, Sharon, you might gather from the way in which I talk about faith that I am not someone who puts a lot of faith in faith. I think about faith as more about that aspect about pure embodied passion that is driven by purpose. And purpose has to have a directionality and tangibility that's associated with it. So it's that faith is not useful if you're a stone Buddha. My teacher used to talk about if all you do is do meditation and sit on the cushion without interaction in the world, that it's actually easier to go and buy a stone Buddha in a garden shop and just put it in your garden and look at it from day to day. But that notion of embodiment requires an energy, and it also requires a directionality and a purpose. And so those three steps, the step of letting go of all of the doubts and suspicions and fears that you have, many of which are justifiable, and knowing that you need to move, which is, what I would call the leap. The leap requires you to leave the boundaries of the Earth's gravity, knowing that you are moving towards that which it is that you are hoping to impact. And that's the aim part. Strategically, tactically, understanding the orientation of your actions, and that you're doing that towards a more thriving future. So I don't feel any need to put a lot of energy into the apocalyptic future. All we have to do is allow the world to continue as it is, and that will become so. But if the world is to come through this time into a more hopeful place, but also survive the collapse with less collateral damage, then we actually need to think of the world very specifically as something that we are in creation of, and therefore we have to act. Right? So leaping, aiming, and then acting in ways that would interrupt the habit of the ways in which we tend to move very incrementally. We could have a very radical point of view, but still move very incrementally towards that which we aim, rather than in larger leaps.
I wrote a book called Faith, Trusting Your Own Deepest Experience. And it was so interesting for me because when I would be meeting with people or teaching and they would say, "What are you working on?" I'd say, "I'm writing a book on faith." And often people had a lot of disquietude about it or even scorn, and like, "Why are you doing that?" Because for so many people, that word was equal to being silenced or not being able to ask questions or surrendering your own vision of what is true in utter deference to someone else. And it was a very powerful thing to explore the topic and to really describe more what it meant to me, which is much more like what you were talking about, alignment with one's own inner strengths, with a bigger picture of the world. But it was just an interesting time, the amount of bad feeling people had really about the concept.
Which I believe is more about the disquiet that we have with religious institutions. Right? And, but if we look at sort of the foundational aspect of spirit, really requires you to move from the inside out, and in ways in which you're willing for all of that to be in relationship to each other and not separate from each other. And that requires faith.
Mm-hmm. And I love that quote, part of your quotation. We have faith in our fellow travelers, fellow warriors, fellow poets, fellow farmers, fellow cooks on the path we are building together because we are building together. And it's such an illumination of how we do live in an interconnected universe, however alone or isolated we may feel. The actual truth is that our lives are all connected, and that is why it's powerful. Because it's speaking of a very fundamental truth.
Very much so. It's earlier in our conversation, Sharon, you asked about how we could be doing work that we call activism, social activism, or social justice, or political activism, and how we could lose our faith, essentially, in that. And I believe that a good amount of that occurs because of the way in Western society that we think about our work as individuals rather than as communities or generations of peoples that are endeavoring together with each other in mind. If you're endeavoring together, rather than there being, the separation that frequently occurs within movement spaces, that you would understand that sometimes you might take a role that may look more leaderly, and another time that your job is to make sure everyone is fed, or something is tended to, or that healing is required, that there would be many, many, many roles that would need to come together in relationship to each other. So if we look at collective work versus individual work, that the way in which we are holding the way forward, but also our energy will be different.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I've seen too as a kind of strong pattern for people who in some ways are on the front lines of suffering, whether in their families or in their work, their efforts to make this a better world, they're acknowledging and seeing a lot of pain that other people would, just try to avoid. But sometimes for some people, that is accompanied by a real difficulty kind of taking in the joy and the wonder and the beauty that also can exist. And in fact, one of the stories I tell about myself in that regard has to do with a visit to Maui when I was going to teach with Ram Dass, and and I was leaving freezing cold New England in the winter and going to Maui, which is just has unearthly beauty, as you know. And it was on my public schedule because it was a retreat, so everyone knew I was going to Maui. But nonetheless, when I landed in the airport and I started getting all these emails from people like, wow, you're on Maui. That's incredible. My first response, which I wrote, was, it's very humid here. You have no idea how humid it is. It's not as nice as you think. It's like I couldn't just take it in and take delight in my great good fortune in being there. And that became a story that I told in the retreat. And it was like a little sub-theme of the retreat. And when I was leaving the meditation hall one day, I heard a conversation behind me between a friend and the son of another friend. And his mom had not been able to come to the retreat. And he was saying, she was so sad that something happened, like at work or something, and she couldn't show up at the last minute. And she feels so bad. And then I heard my friend say to him, did you tell her how humid it is here? So it was just an interesting theme because sometimes we need to open to that as well. The joy and the delight and the gifts that really are around us and within us.
Yes, there's that part where we may be tempted for the comfort of someone else to paint a selective picture about things, and then we can get into a habit pattern around that. And I also think that there is an aspect about feeling guilty about enjoying a moment when there is so much suffering and so much work that needs to be done, and that actually means that we tend to enter into a cycle around which, in a 24-hour period, we're not adequately refilled with the part of us that needs the fuel, right? That whether that fuel is food or rest or just, the spirit. And we, that is a formula for burnout. It's a formula for burnout.
Well, you have the word resilience in your subtitle, so there it is. Like, what makes for resilience?
Now, I think resilience, unfortunately, requires a practice that modern times don't necessarily support, and that practice is discipline. The discipline of the regularity of life, so that you can do the work in the long haul. Sharon, I'm glad to share a few gray hairs with you. And I would say to anyone who is younger, you want to be able to do the work at all stages of your life. And in order to that, you really do need to have the discipline of practice that would allow you to do that, including the setting aside of things, so that you're not attempting to carry all the burdens from the day that you were born to the day that you pass.
Nice. Well, there's another section of your book in which you explore the ways we can work to be more mindful of our habits. And you have a group of practices aimed specifically towards interrupting habits, what you describe as the cultivation of ways and muscles for choices, horizons, and pivots. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about those, maybe starting with clearing the deck.
Sure. So, I think there are, of course, many practices. I know that you teach many of those, and that for me there are like a small set fundamentally. If you want to be able to be a practitioner that is having deep impact in the world at this particular moment of collapse. And so the first is the practice of clearing the deck. So, which is to say that we have to be able to set aside the loads that we have and make choices. So we have to interrupt the habit of saying there are many things to do, and therefore every day there are many things that you do. You need to make some sharper choices about things, so that anything that you do, you can go deeper on it or you can do more on it. And so therefore you have to clear the deck to make that possible. Breathing, which we have mentioned before, right, is fundamental. And the conscious breath in which you are breathing slower in your body has a absolute physiological impact on you. And it allows you to remain more grounded, less connected to your amygdala, more associated with your prefrontal cortex. And, a grounded breath that never exceeds 10 cycles per minute, even in physical activity, right? This long-term, shallow breathing that many people have, or going back and forth, which is to say people might have a meditation practice and breathe in one way. And then you're in a tight situation with your coworker, and suddenly the breath comes up higher in your chest, and you've forgotten every aspect of your meditative breath. So you're in a duality around that, right? Rather than meditation is where you learn how you are to breathe all the time. It's just a laboratory for that. The third practice is to not see everything from the focal point of being in the weeds with it, with your eyeballs attached to your screen. That notion of objectivity is not a metaphor. That notion of objectivity requires you to be able to step away and to see things from a larger vantage point in which you can see the directionality of movement. You can see how things are emerging, what things are receding, who are the people that are on the field of play, and not just have it be a jumble. That is very much a practice. The fourth practice is the practice of cultivation. So, cultivation is a combination of that which you may think what a farmer does and that which you may think a gatherer does, right? Which is to say that whatever it is that you're engaged in requires relational work. You can't just lay something down and say, well, that's my idea, and walk away from it. If it is a worthy thing, then it needs to be fed and given air and given water. Other people need to come into it. You need to share the ground of what it is. You need to see what the next steps might be, how something might evolve. And all those things are very much about cultivation. Cultivation in an interdependent way, not in a codependent way. Then there's a practice of storytelling. There's a good amount of impact work that's done these days in which what we have learned how to do is we've learned how to analyze things. And analysis is not the same thing as storytelling. If we really want to create something, then we need to be able to envision it. And to envision it, we need to have a clear picture. And a clear picture has to be visual. And so if we're going to use words, written words or spoken words, then those words need to be devoid of concepts and, isms, all the various isms in the world. And to be able to tell the story of what the future is going to need or what our great-grandchildren are going to need. The descendants, even if you don't have children, I don't have children. But for me, the requirement of any generation is to be able to tell the stories that intersect generations, that cross them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I also, on another topic, I wanted to ask you about your work related to the devastating fires in Lahaina and Maui in 2023. And could you share what you're doing there to support that rebuilding?
So most of my work, Sharon, there is in relationship to being in consult, to be a thought partner with people who are doing that work or people who are needing to make decisions about that work, whether they be on Maui or they are, at the legislature, for example. To be in consult with people to expand the notion of what may now be possible, to not think of just a return to the day prior to the fire as being enough. That the fire, in many ways, was born because of conditions that we allowed to accumulate over time, over decades, really. That began even before most of us were born. And we have now not only the opportunity, but really some obligation to not think of the day prior to the fire, that state of being, to be that which we will settle for. So, as every place on this earth right now is more subjected to conditions of drought, ways in which we might overuse the water that is there naturally, the way in which we might think of success as needing to build more, to have more. Those are all things that we need to step back and reconsider. But to be in that reconsideration is one not only of policy, but one of humanity. And so it's in that place of being a thought partner that I have supported the work.
It's wonderful. And before we finish, I'm hoping you can lead us in a practice of some kind to bring our conversation to a close.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. Sharon, I am a novice to podcasts, but a thing that I do know is people are in many places where they listen. So it may not be convenient for them to pause at this moment. This may be something that they may just listen to and do at some other time. Or perhaps pause the podcast now and take up this practice when they're in a more convenient place. There's a practice that we do that's called resonant breathing. And what resonant breathing is that we are taking the breath in, and on the exhale, that we either hum or we intone a vowel. And we intone the vowel in the pronunciation that would be done in Spanish or in Native Hawaiian. So the vowels would be a, e, o, and u. So we'll go ahead and do that. And if you are doing this meditation in a place where you can intone it out loud, that would be the most beneficial. Or you might just be doing the exhale while you listen to the vowel. So we take our breath in.
Thank you so much for that practice and also for joining me in the conversation today. And in your, you did beautifully, given that you were, as you put it, a novice to podcast. Really, it was a great pleasure hearing about your wonderful work. So thank you.
Aloha, Sharon. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
Hey folks, thanks so much for listening, staying with us. And we're looking forward to a wonderful year of podcast episodes with you. If you'd like to learn more about Norma's work or get yourself a copy of her recent release, When No Things Work, you can check out her website, normawong.com, NORMAWONG.com. And for all things Sharon, including the February Meditation Challenge, other online courses, and of course, her many virtual events, check out SharonSalzberg.com. This has been the Metta Hour podcast, brought to you by the Be Here Now Network. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, and may you live with ease.